work at the office, or send your children to school if you don't have the shot. Meanwhile, the social pressure is enormous. Friends may have informed you already that you are not welcome at their parties or their weddings if you haven't been vaccinated. So there is a lot of pressure to comply. At some point, you probably will comply. It's just too difficult not to be vaccinated in this country. But before you do comply, ask yourself, do you know anything about the potential risks? Probably you don't know much. We assume the risks are negligible. Vaccines are not dangerous. That's not a guess. We know that pretty conclusively from the official numbers. Every flu season, for example, we give influenza shots to more than 160 million Americans. Every year, a relatively small number of people seem to die after getting those shots. To be precise, in 2019, that number was 203 people. The year before that, 2018, it was 119 people. In 2017, it was a total of just 85 people who died after getting the flu shot. Now, every death is tragic, obviously, but big picture, we do not consider those numbers to be disqualifying. We keep giving flu shots and very few people complain about it. So the question is, how do those numbers compare to the apparent death rate from the coronavirus vaccines now being distributed across the country? That's worth knowing. So we checked today, and here's the answer. And these numbers come from the same set of government numbers that we just read to you from. Here they are. Between late December of 2020 and last month, a total of 3,362 people apparently died after getting the COVID vaccine in the United States. 3,362. That's an average of roughly 30 people every day. So what does that add up to? By the way, that reporting period ended on April 23, and we don't have numbers past that, not quite up to date. But we can assume that another 360 people at that rate have died in the 12 days since. So you put it all together, and that is a total of 3,722 deaths. That's almost 4,000 people who died after getting the COVID vaccines. The actual number is almost certainly higher than that, perhaps vastly higher than that. The data we just cited come from the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, VAERS. VAERS is managed by the CDC and the FDA. VAERS has received a lot of criticism over the years, some of it founded. Some critics have argued for a long time that VAERS undercounts vaccine injuries. A report submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services in 2010 concluded that, quote, fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported by the VAERS system, fewer than 1%. So what is the real number of people who apparently have been killed or injured by the vaccines? Well, we don't know that number. Nobody does, and we're not going to speculate about it on this show. But it's clear that what is happening now, for whatever reason, is not even close to normal. It's not even close to what we see in previous years with previous vaccines. Most vaccines are not accused of killing large numbers of people. The Menveo vaccine, for example, is given to people around the world, often children, to prevent bacterial meningitis. In this country, only one person died from that vaccine in the entire period between 2010 and 2015. One. So compare that to what is happening now with the coronavirus rollout. In just the first 4 months of this year, the US government has recorded more deaths after COVID vaccinations than from all other vaccines administered in the United States between mid-1997 and the end of 2013. That is a period of 15 and a half years. Again, more people, according to VAERS, have died after getting the shot in 4 months during a single vaccination campaign than from all other vaccines combined over more than a decade and a half. Chart that out. It's a stunning picture. Now, the debate is over what it means. Again, there's a lot of criticism of the reporting system. Some people say, well, it's just a coincidence that someone gets a shot and then dies, possibly from other causes. No one really knows is the truth. We spoke to one physician today who actively treats COVID patients. He described what we're seeing now as the single deadliest mass vaccination event in modern history. Whatever is causing it, it is happening as we speak. So you'd think that someone in authority might want to know what it is, what's going on. If the vaccine injury reporting system is flawed, and clearly it is flawed, why hasn't it been fixed? And more to the point, why has there not been an independent vaccine safety board impaneled to assess what is happening and reassure people who stumble across official government numbers on the internet? But amazingly, none of that has been done. No one even mentions the numbers. And in fact, you're not allowed to. You'll be pulled off the internet if you do. The people in charge do not acknowledge them. Instead, they warn us about what might happen if we don't take the vaccine. Here's Joe Biden.
You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there, but there's one fact I want every American to know. People who are not fully vaccinated can still die every day from COVID-19. This is your choice. It's life and death.
People who are not fully vaccinated can still die every day from COVID-19, Joe Biden said. And as a factual matter, that is true. But it is also misleading. Not all Americans are at similar risk of dying from COVID-19. Some are at relatively high risk, the old and the sick. They might want to get vaccinated, most do. Some are at very low risk of dying, the young and the healthy. Others appear to be at essentially no risk at all. That would include anyone who's had COVID and recovered. Virtually all of those people seem to be immune. And that's true for many viruses. So those second two categories, the young and the healthy and the previously infected, may add up, if you combine them, to hundreds of millions of people in this country. The funny thing is the White House, the official policymakers who are designing the vaccine rollout, do not acknowledge that those categories even exist. Health authorities are pretending that everyone's health and risk potential is exactly the same as everyone else's. And that's why Joe Biden has demanded that 70% of all American adults, regardless of age, regardless of health condition, regardless critically of pre-existing antibodies from previous infections, get the COVID shot by the 4th of July, 2 months from now, or else. Now, this might be an acceptable policy, would never be an ethical policy, but as a practical matter, it might be acceptable to the country if COVID vaccines, we could show conclusively, came with no risk. And if we truly understood the long-term effects of those vaccines. But neither one of those things is true. We know that according to the government reporting system, thousands of people have died after getting the shot. That is true in this country, where it's hotly debated when it's talked about at all, but it's also true in European countries whose record keeping on this question is, if anything, more reliable than ours. Many thousands of other people appear to have been injured after getting the vaccination. VAERS records nearly 900 non-fatal heart attacks in people who just received the shot. 2,700 people reported unexplained chest pains. In all, the vaccine, according to the government reporting system, appears to have contributed to at least 8,000 hospitalizations. Some of the side effects defy easy explanation. Researcher Alex Berenson has noted that coronavirus vaccines now account for almost 1/3 of all tinnitus reports in the VAERS database. Tinnitus, the ringing in your ears. The American Tinnitus Association says it has received many questions on that link. It's still not known if there is a link, but there's concern about it. Meanwhile, researchers at Oxford and UCLA have begun tracking coronavirus vaccine side effects across 8 separate countries. What have they found? Among other things, quote, women aged 18 to 34 years old had a higher rate of deep vein thrombosis than men of the same age. They also found that heart attacks were, quote, common in people 85 years and older who'd taken the vaccine. They found some serious potential side effects in some children. Quote, anaphylaxis and appendicitis were more common in young people. Now, vaccines are complicated medicines, and as with any drug, it can take a long time to get it precisely right, the dosage, for example. And this is not the first time that people have been hurt during a vaccination campaign. That is bound to happen. What's different this time, and so striking, is the reaction to these numbers. Here's a contrast for you. In 1976, the US government vaccinated 45 million people for the swine flu. A total of 53 people reportedly died after getting that shot. And the US government immediately halted the vaccination program. Why? Because authorities decided it was too risky. It wasn't worth it. Contrast that with what's happening now. This time, our health authorities have reserved their energy for anyone who dares to question vaccines. LifeSite News, it's a nonprofit news organization, just found itself permanently banned from Facebook. Why? Because it reported government numbers from the VAERS database, something that we just did on the air. Famously, when podcaster Joe Rogan asked whether healthy young people ought to be getting the COVID vaccine, the media treated him like a war criminal.
We know the anti-vaxxer conspiracy theories have been proliferating online, but it doesn't help it when people with major platforms feed that beast, like Spotify's $100 million man, Joe Rogan.
Dr. Fauci, before I let you go, I do want you to weigh in on Joe Rogan. How frustrating is it for you for this misinformation to continue to spread about COVID-19, especially when there are folks still out there saying it's a hoax?
It's disappointing. Joe Rogan is a hugely influential person with a massive audience. It's mystifying why he would give people such bad information that puts them in harm's way.
Joe Rogan, who is one of the world's highest paid and most popular podcast hosts, is giving air to anti-vaccine narratives.
Anti-vaccine narratives. He did nothing of the sort. Almost everything you just heard was a lie that obscured a very simple and potentially relevant question that he asked, which is, should healthy young people receive the vaccine? We're not precisely sure what the risks are. It is a lie to say there are no risks. There are risks in everything, including in getting a vaccine. So why not rationally weigh the risk-reward ratio, as we do with every decision that we make? For that, he was denounced as an anti-vaxxer kook, a danger to public safety. Yahoo News published a piece entitled, Joe Rogan, who's not a doctor, in contrast to the Yahoo News reporters, gives terrible vaccine advice. Keep in mind, this is the same Yahoo News that published this piece. Quote, 5 things Bill Gates wants you to know about COVID-19 variants. One of the very few elected officials in the country who has said a word about any of this, who's asked the obvious questions, not attacking vaccines, wondering about their effects, which is a legitimate thing to do, is Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Last week, Johnson asked Francis Collins, the director of NIH, why so many Americans, according to the government's own numbers, appear to be dying after getting the shot. Maybe there's a good answer for that. Collins wouldn't even acknowledge that was happening. Instead, Collins fretted that if the population focuses too much on the potential harm from vaccines, people might be hesitant to get them. I challenged his use of the term vaccine hesitancy, Ron Johnson told us in a conversation today. I told him that based on the VAERS deaths and my conversations with people who have chosen not to get vaccinated, a better description would be people who are hesitant to be coerced into participating in the largest drug trial in history, end quote. Why is that an unfair description? Exactly. There's a reason that many states have more vaccine doses than they can use. Some people just don't want the vaccine, and that is their right, period. And not all of them are crazy. Health decisions used to be considered personal choices. We didn't ask about them. They were considered personal as recently, by the way, as last fall. It was in September of 2020, at the height of the presidential campaign, that a CNN reporter asked Kamala Harris whether she would be willing to take the coronavirus vaccine once it became available. Her response, quote, well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us, Harris responded. I will say that I would not trust Donald Trump. A month later at the vice presidential debate, Harris was, if anything, more emphatic on the subject. Quote, if Donald Trump tells us we should take the vaccine, she declared, I'm not going to take it. Kamala Harris has, of course, since changed her mind. She's no longer skeptical of the vaccine, nor does she tolerate the skepticism of others. Instead, she's an enthusiastic participant in COVID theater, and that's really the only name for it. Just today, Kamala Harris and her husband made a point of kissing each other in front of photographers while wearing masks. They did that despite the fact that they are married, that they live together, that they were standing outside at the time, and despite the fact that both have been vaccinated. Now, a number of crude jokes come to mind, but for once we're going to pass on that. What exactly are we watching here? We're watching the crudest kind of propaganda designed by the cynical for the benefit of a population they consider stupid and weak and malleable. And it's not just Kamala Harris. Everyone is in on it, even the corporate comedians. Watch this buffoon do what we assume is an unpaid ad for Moderna.
Oh, but you read something on Facebook?
Your friend from high school who sells jewelry? She posted it?
The one who's 53 and still builds dollhouses?
You heard what? On whose podcast?
Is he a doctor? No. Scientist? No. Can he name one of the ingredients in the vaccine?
Can he point to his gabella?
Then tell him to shut the up. The gabella's right here, by the way.
Get the vaccine. Get the vaccine.
Just get the vaccine. Roll the up and get the vaccine.
And tell your friend on Facebook to stick to jewelry.
It doesn't make you laugh, it makes you nervous. Why are they talking to you that way? Why are they giving you the finger on TV? No matter how many fingers they give you, it doesn't change what remains true for the country. If American citizens are going to be forced to take this vaccine or any other medicine, they have an absolute right to know what it is and what its effects might be, and they have an absolute right to ask that question without being silenced or censored or mocked or given the finger. And no amount of happy talk or coercion or appeals to false patriotism can change that, period. Martin Kulldorff is a professor at Harvard Medical School. We're happy to have him. Professor, thanks so much for coming on. I have a really simple question. I know that there is a vigorous debate over what the VAERS numbers mean. They're dismissed by many, they're embraced by others. But it seems to me if the system of reporting adverse effects of vaccines, this or any other, is flawed, and it's been that way for a long time, why hasn't it been fixed? And critically, why isn't there an independent panel of vaccine safety experts assessing what is going on and calming everyone down?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, the CDC VAERS system is not a good system for looking at adverse events after vaccines. It's only useful for things that happen within like an hour or so after vaccinations, because like anaphylaxis, for example. But other things, you have the number of events, but you don't have what's expected under the expected by chance. So therefore, it's not a very useful system at all. And the two better systems is the CDC Vaccine Safety Data Link system, as well as FDA has a system called the BEST, where they actually know how many people got the vaccine, how many people had the adverse reaction, and how many of those adverse reactions would you have expected by chance if they hadn't taken vaccines.
If you're going to tell the population, coerce the population into taking a medicine, and say, you can't go to work, you can't fly, you can't educate your children if you don't take this, why isn't it incumbent on you to make certain that you know exactly what the drug does, that you've tested for it? For example, people who have pre-existing antibodies who've recovered from COVID were not included in the clinical trials, neither were pregnant women. Why should the authorities expect a population to take a medicine whose effects that we can't know because they weren't in the clinical trials? I don't understand that.
I think that's true. I think to use coercion in public health is a very bad thing. Public health must be based on trust. And coercion actually, I think, damages the confidence in vaccines. So vaccine passport or to mandate students to take vaccines, I think is a very, very bad public health policy. And as a vaccine scientist, we have worked for many decades to increase the confidence in vaccines. And there are a few anti-vaxxers who don't think anybody should get vaccines. But the damage that they have done is much less than the damage that are done by those people who are advocating for vaccine passports. Because if you try to force something down somebody, then they're very, very likely to say no. And not only for the COVID vaccine, but for other childhood vaccines, which are very important, like measles or polio. So these vaccine passports and vaccine mandates are a very, very bad idea for public health, which is reducing the confidence in vaccines. So it's very unfortunate.
I think that's so well put and true. You don't need to force things that are self-evidently good. So they shouldn't. I agree with that. Professor, thank you for coming on tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
So you just heard a professor from Harvard University, of all places, say the obvious, which is that coercion is counterproductive when you're distributing vaccines. It makes people trust the medicine less. But it's not slowing down. Vaccine passports are now being rolled out in the state of Washington. The governor there, Jay Inslee, is not calling them vaccine passports, but it doesn't matter what they call them. That's exactly what they are. Jason Rance is a radio show host in Seattle. He joins us tonight to explain what exactly they're doing. Jason, thanks for coming on. What are they doing?
Yeah, so Governor Inslee just released some guidance allowing vaccinated-only sections, so vaccination segregations at outdoor stadiums, at graduation ceremonies for schools, even your church. So now you get some of your freedoms back to pray in vaccinated-only sections. Now, you still have to wear a mask outside surrounded by people who are vaccinated, which obviously makes no sense. You get a separate entrance to go into some of these sections, but you have to show your vaccine paperwork. You literally have to show then a vaccine passport to gain entrance into these sections. So you have to prove that you've been vaccinated. You have to show your medical paperwork, your medical history. So no longer are we talking about your privacy. No longer, by the way, are we talking about IDs being racist or equity concerning access to the vaccines. You actually have to show this information. Now, some people are saying, look, this is not the same thing as coercion. This is all optional. However, to go to Washington State University or the University of Washington, students have to get vaccinated. It is a mandate. The staff at the University of Washington do not, but the staff do. So we're talking about college-age students, many of whom have already had COVID, who have literally the antibodies going through their system as we speak, have to get a vaccine, and they have no choice if they want to go back to campus. That is the state doing this.
May I ask a question? So there is evidence, and compelling evidence, talk to physicians who treat COVID who will tell you that people who have active antibodies, T cells are protected, who recovered from COVID, have more protection against the virus than people who've been vaccinated, but they still have to get the vaccine. It's not adequate to show proof of antibodies?
No, every single person, if you want to go onto campus as a student, you will have to get a vaccine. And I've asked questions as to why the more vulnerable folks, like the staff members who are in that age demographic of 60 plus, don't have to at some of these schools. They won't really give me an answer.
Right. They don't give answers to any questions. Like, if you've been vaccinated, why do you care if other people have been? But no one answers that either. Jason Rantz, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So among the many country-changing provisions in the coronavirus relief bill, there were $5 billion allocated to American farmers based on their skin color, right out of the Jim Crow South. That bill, by definition, denies funding to people who have the wrong skin color. Now, one farmer is suing the administration over that law. He joins us next.